All right, we recording?
Yes.
Perfect.
We're on.
Great. Well, yeah, so this is our first lecture. This will be on affirmative strategy. We'll talk a lot about prime minister constructives. We'll talk a bit about the member of government. As I was just saying, this is going to be geared toward the context of parliamentary debate in particular, but much of what we discuss here can be applied to the other format to debate we do. You just have to be kind of selective about it. All right, so prime minister constructives. Let's get a bit more advanced. So we know, like at a basic level, the PMC is going to consist of three things, like just very, very broad strokes. You've got the stuff that comes before either your plan text or your advocacy statement, depending on what type of debate it is, right? So if it's a policy debate, you're hopefully going to have a plan text. If it's a factor value debate, you're going to have a thesis. In essence, it's not really a plan per se, but it will identify what your stance in the resolution is. So you've got that, you've got the stuff that comes before it, and then you've got the stuff that comes after it. The stuff that comes before it is a resolutional analysis, right? You identify what the resolution is, what it means, what type of debate it is, the criterion for the round. You've got the ability, sometimes if it's a policy debate, to present like background or context, which we describe as inherency. Inherency is like an explanation of why the plan is not yet passed in the real world, just the brief version of it. And then we have the plan text or your advocacy statement. We'll talk a little more about strategies for that. The stuff after the plan is your contentions, right? So the contentions are the individual reasons to affirm the resolution. Pretty straightforward. Any questions about that so far? Perfect, great. All right, so let's start a little bit about, let's start off, and I'm just kind of skimming through my notes here. Let's talk about writing a plan text or an advocacy statement. So remember that in a policy debate, you have the option to defend the resolution as a whole, but that typically is not desirable in a lot of instances. Sometimes it's mandatory. Sometimes the resolution specifies very clearly a single agent and a single plan of action. Other times, however, you're going to have some flexibility. So it's important to really be precise in the way that you write a plan text. In other words, you don't want to just kind of flippantly say, oh, I'm going to write this. Every single word in your plan text is meaning that you have to be prepared to defend, and every word creates strategic considerations. There's a couple that we can discuss. One is obviously topicality. Topicality refers to whether or not the plan text fits the parameters of the resolution. My favorite metaphor for topicality is think about the resolution as a box of See's candies, right? Every individual See's candy is a bit different. They have different fillings, some have nuts, some don't, but fundamentally they all fit within the box of See's candy. So if the resolution is you should eat a piece of See's candy, your plan can pick and choose one or more of those specific pieces, and they all look a little bit different from each other, but at the end of the day, they're topical because they all fit within that box of See's candy. On the other hand, if you choose a plan text to eat a Hershey's bar, well, that's not topical. It might look like See's candy, it might taste like it, but fundamentally it is not the thing, so it is not topical. So you really want to be sure that you are writing a plan that clearly fits the boundaries of the resolution and avoid excessive moving parts. The other thing to be aware of is you want to avoid extra topical concerns, meaning you don't want to have a plan text that does things in addition to what the resolution says. So if the resolution is we should increase military funding for Ukraine, and the plan text says we should, in order to fund this military support for Ukraine, we should stop all arms sales to Israel, and then the case is all about why arms sales to Israel is bad, well, that, my friend, is extra topical because the resolution did not ask you to do that. So you cannot do that, even if you were to establish that normal means is, taking aid away from one country to give it to another country. You just can't do it. So be mindful of that. Keep in mind also that the plan text is important because it is the focal point of all the offense in debate. Are you familiar with the offense-defense paradigm?
Off the top of my head, I'm assuming offense as in attack the plan, defense, protect your plan.
Kind of, and it's not even specific to the plan. It's more of a general argumentative approach. The most basic way to put it is this: offense is any argument that helps you win a debate. It is a reason to vote for you. Defensive arguments are arguments that don't necessarily by themselves mean the judge should vote for you. Rather, they're meant to, as the name kind of implies, either defend against your opponent's offensive attacks or to create arguments that mitigate the arguments your opponents have made. Basically, defensive arguments are arguments that are like let me give an example. A classic example is like link argumentation. If you are the affirmative and you are answering a disadvantage, let's say like real basic level, the disadvantage is your plan is bad for the economy. A defensive argument is our plan is not bad for the economy. An offensive argument is our plan is actually good for the economy. Those are two similar but different things. Like, can you tell the difference between our plan is not bad for the economy versus our plan is good for the economy, right? Our plan is not bad is like, okay, well, even if that's true, it's not a reason why your plan is good. It's just a reason why your plan is not bad. But our plan is good for the economy, that's actually a reason to vote for you. That's a reason why your stance is good and beneficial, right? In debate, it's always to your benefit to maximize the number of offensive arguments you make. Defense is important and it has its place, but at the end of the day, the way that you win debates is through offense, right? Your offensive arguments are the reasons to vote for you, and so you want to be aware of how the plan text that you write generates offense. So beyond that, you want to make sure, finally, that the plan text is strategic. And what I mean by this is you want to be thinking about, whenever you receive a topic, what is the strongest ground on this topic? What part of this topic offers the most compelling reasons to vote for me? And just go straight to that when it comes to developing a plan text and for developing your contentions, your case. It's almost always going to boil down to a couple things. The most obvious is like so talked about the importance of offensive arguments. What are the avenues that lead you to the highest quality offensive arguments? And I mean this in the sense that the impacts that stem from that offense should be really high quality. They should be very probable. They should be high magnitude. They should potentially be irreversible impacts, which can be a kind of a secondary consequence. And of course, the faster those impacts happen, the better. In a separate lecture, we're going to talk more about impact calculus and how to do it. But when you're setting up a plan, strategically, it makes the most sense to try to think about what are the arguments that lead to the largest pieces of offense. And sometimes you'll find that the offense is very little on face to do with the resolution. That's often a very strategic thing to do. Like, for example, in high school, in my senior year, the resolution, and this was policy debate, but the resolution was the United States federal government should substantially increase its, I think it was like its investment in alternative energy or something like that. And I ran an affirmative at the end of the year about a very specific type of nuclear energy. But one of my advantages wasn't about why nuclear energy was good, it was about why developing this specific form of nuclear energy helps our relations with Russia. Like, it was all about like nuclear cooperation and technology sharing and like a Section 123 agreement, which is just well beyond the scope of this lecture, but it was effective because a lot of teams didn't really have much to say about Russia on an energy topic, right? So sometimes finding these kinds of like areas can be really helpful.
Could someone say that wasn't topical or no?
So that's a good question, and the answer lies in what the plan text says.
Okay.
The plan text didn't say anything about nuclear cooperation with Russia. Rather, we presented evidence that the Russians were very interested in this technology, and if we were to develop, it would be likely that there would be nuclear cooperation on this technology with them.
Okay.
Basically, we aren't fiating that we share this technology. We're just saying it will probably happen.
Okay.
Fiat, by the way, this is a good concept to explain because it's relevant to the plan text. In the world of policy resolutions, we always assume that the plan will actually happen in the real world. The affirmative gets the power of fiat, meaning whatever plan they propose, we assume it will be implemented. So that way the negative is unable to bring up arguments like, oh, this is unrealistic, Congress is gridlocked, it will never happen. Those arguments are off limits. They can't make those arguments because the affirmative has the power of fiat. That said, fiat does not mean the affirmative just gets to snap their fingers and the problem is solved. They still have the burden to show that the plan that they propose can actually work. If the resolution is the USFG should do some deep space exploration and the affirmative plan is to develop a warp engine so we can go faster than light and explore the galaxy, well, the affirmative can't just fiat that a warp drive will suddenly exist and start working, right? They have to defend that technology is indeed possible, which as of today it is not, obviously. So that's important to note with fiat. Okay, so plan text, just to summarize overall, you want them to be carefully chosen, you want them to be specific, assuming the resolution is not one that limits you to a single plan text, and you want them to be strategic in the sense that they lead you to diverse and high quality offensive arguments. Okay, let's talk about strategies for developing contentions, because I think that this is the place where you can most gain an advantage over your opponents. The first thing to note is I'm a really big proponent of running fewer but more developed contentions. I actually think that the sweet spot for the number of contentions you should run is 2. Like, I think that more than 2 and your contentions are going to be just a bit too shallow. They're not going to have the argumentative robustness that you really need in order to show convincingly that the contention is true. Only running one contention, however, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. That's just risky, right? So I think 2 is the perfect number. I think in a parliamentary debate, the average number of arguments within a contention should be anywhere between 10 to 20. 10 being on the low side. Like individual arguments and sub-pointed arguments. That seems like a lot, right?
Yeah.
But trust me, being able to develop that level of argumentative depth is going to make it vastly more difficult for your opponent to answer your arguments, and it's going to make it a lot easier for you to be able to pull out basically to be able to pull out like concessions that your opponent has made. I'm going to read you kind of just a sample affirmative contention. And I just want you to kind of listen to this, because it's really going to demonstrate how difficult it is for your opponent to answer something that's structured like this. So let me find like a good example here. Okay, here's a sample advantage on the opioid epidemic. The plan text is to pass a policy to revoke the patents for OxyContin, which is like an opioid painkiller, right? And it's very much associated with the opioid crisis. All right, so here's the advantage, the opioid epidemic. And by the way, advantages are typically structured with uniqueness, links, and impacts. Links are, uniqueness is the way things are now, right? How we get from, it basically sets the stage for like, what's the problem we're trying to address. The links refer to generally what the plan does. You can think of this as being like solvency in a sense that is specific to the advantage, and then the impact is like, what is the bad thing that we avoid, or what is the good thing that we gain through this link. All right, so here is the affirmative, and you should try to flow this.
Okay.
This might be challenging for you, but try to keep up with this. Okay. The advantage of the opioid epidemic, uniqueness. The first argument is the opioid epidemic is rampant and accelerating. The A set point is between 2006 and 2012, over 76 billion opioid pills were prescribed in the United States. The B set point is between 1999 and 2021. Nearly over 750,000 people died from a drug overdose, and over 500,000 of those were attributable to opioids. The C set point is that as of 2019, 10.1 million people over the age of 12 misused opioids in the last year, and 9.7 million people misused prescription pain relievers. The D set point is that it was made worse by COVID, hospital backups, and other infrastructure issues that caused drug overdoses to trend upwards to 90,000 deaths a month, which is significantly more than in previous years. The second argument under uniqueness is OxyContin remains protected by patents. So despite the original patent setting to expire in 2013, a new formulation allowed a renewal until 2030. This means that OxyContin will be always able to renew its patent with minor tweaks to the formula to keep their profit margins and intellectual property protected. The B subpoint is the renewed patent, which under the condition that the formulation deterred snorting and injection. The FDA denies seeing any evidence that abuse reduction ever occurred, however. The C subpoint indicates, the studies indicate that accelerated fentanyl and heroin deaths in 2017 were a result of OxyContin's reformulation, accounting for 43,000 additional deaths. The third uniqueness argument is the capability to solve the epidemic exists, but the OxyContin patent accelerates the epidemic. The A step point is OxyContin is actively incentivized to be prescribed as doctors get money to prescribe specific medications. In 1994, Purdue, which is the manufacturer, called the opioid business a franchise. This leads to OxyContin being used as a first resort painkiller. The B subpoint is non-addictive prescription opioids and NSAIDs exist and can and do become replacement for OxyContin in the status quo. However, they're cheaper and not backed up by potentially increased profit margins. The C subpoint is, despite direct advertising to doctors being banned in 2018, Purdue profits have only accelerated. OxyContin prices have risen 95%. The D subpoint is emergency treatment and overdose reversal medication like naloxone exists now, but they cannot meet demand because of accelerated abuse. The links. The plan decreases incentives to prescribe OxyContin. The A subpoint is OxyContin can maintain a high price because of its patent protection. The plan removes a high profit margin, often to doctors, for even prescribing it in the first place. The B subpoint is this causes decreased prescription of OxyContin and incentivizes prescriptions of less harmful alternatives. The C subpoint is this also allows for the new manufacture of patent-free generics of oxycodone, allowing for outside use of prescription name brands. The second argument is the plan increases the availability of other drugs. The A subpoint is the plan drives down the price of brand name OxyContin as the new generic oxycodone increases availability and enters the market. The B subpoint is decreasing incentives for prescription, increases NSAIDs and non-addictive opioids as a first line of treatment. The C subpoint is it resolves the drive of doctors to prescribe high profit margin drugs by ensuring that their profit margins are decreased when they prescribe oxycodone. The third argument is this solves the opioid epidemic because the A subpoint is prescription drugs are the main factor behind the epidemic. Those who become addicted by abuse after prescription are trapped in a cycle of acquiring opioids and then creating drug-seeking behavior and escalation of the addiction. So prescription opiates are a gateway to heroin and fentanyl use, which have significant higher death rates. The B subpoint is this resolves the opioid epidemic. Fueled by prescription OxyContin, the plan severs the key internal link to access to billions of addictive opioid drugs in the first place. The impact is opioid deaths. The A subpoint is opioid death across the board have topped 100,000 per year as of 5 years ago. The B subpoint is the acceleration of 28.5% since 2020 would cause almost 130,000 deaths by April of 2022. This is caused by prescription opioid abuse and synthetic opioids only resolving the gateway of prescription oxycodone can solve, and statistics are lowballing the death count. It doesn't include pending investigations, which can increase the number by 30%, meaning 150,000 potentially dead per year. The end. That's the advantage.
Okay.
That was a lot of information, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like if you were the negative and you were listening to that entire speech, that was like a 3-4 minute advantage, I think. Maybe it was longer. Would that be easy to answer? No. That was like extremely detailed. And by the way, I'm cheating because I'm reading this from a back file. So like that affirmative has already been written, right? By the way, back files are often your friend, and I'm going to introduce you to some resources where you can find some back files.
Is that like already like, I don't want to say pre-written cases, but they have all the info about that certain topic?
It is quite literally a case that you can just pick up and read.
Okay.
Because it's already been written out. This case is about, you can probably tell that that case is about 5 years old, so it's outdated. If you use a back file, you just have to update things like statistics. I'm pretty sure the OxyContin patent hasn't been revoked yet, but I do also know that there is a oh, what do you know? So between 2023 and today, federal courts have ruled that the patent for the patent's already invalidated. So that entire case is not unique. It's not inherent. So you could no longer run that specific case. You could, however, take elements of the advantage and use them in a more up-to-date case. That could be something that you do. But let's talk about that case. Like, what were things that you noticed in terms of how that contention was structured?
It seemed like, I don't want to say every argument, but like it felt like everything had its own subpoint.
Yeah.
So
everything is structured with a sort of a main point, subpoint structure. Yeah. Right. So there's uniqueness, links, impact. So those are your main points. And then underneath that, you have individual subpoints with evidence and warrants. Good. Right? that's a really strong way to design a case using subpoints because it helps to keep arguments organized for flowing, and it really helps to create a structure that you can pull from in later speeches.
Yeah.
It makes it real easy to say, okay, on advantage one, let's go to the uniqueness. Our second subpoint was this. They conceded it. Let's extend it. Let's talk about it some more. It makes it so much easier to sort of refer back to it later in the debate. So that's a great example of how using fewer but more developed contentions can be really worthwhile. So aiming to have, like, within the uniqueness, the length, the impacts, 10, 15, 20 separate individual arguments, like subpoints basically, quickly makes the debate, it makes your opponents feel like they're just swimming uphill. Like it makes it really hard for them. When I look back on my own debate career and I think about the debates, even when I was like debating at a very high level, where I was just lost, it was always those rounds where it seemed like the opponent had 20 different arguments about a topic that I knew literally nothing about. It was just like, what the hell is going on here? If you can instill that kind of like panic in your opponent, it makes it so much easier to win. Okay. Other more advanced PMC things. I'll go back to my notes here. Let's talk a bit about anticipating what the negative is going to say. Oftentimes you can insert what are known as thumpers or spikes in your case. And these are essentially arguments that you make where you say explicitly, they're going to try to say this, don't let them do that. So to use that kind of opioid example, maybe your opponent plans, maybe you think your opponent might try to argue that revoking patents is a bad idea because it is a slippery slope to patent revocations in other areas, and that just collapses pharmaceutical industry's confidence because they won't want to develop new drugs if the government can just revoke them nilly-willy. A thumper would be making an argument like, here's a court case where the court ruled that the FDA can do this in very limited specific situations, which this particular drug happens to fall entirely within. So you can introduce a preemptive argument that kind of reduces the power of that disadvantage. And the reason this is so important is because it gives you the first mover advantage. Generally speaking, being the first to talk about a topic allows you, over the course of the debate, to develop more sophisticated argumentation about it. So it's really to your advantage to do that. Additionally, let's see what else we can focus on here. Let's see. I think that's good. So yeah, PMC structure, resolution analysis you already know about, plan text being strategic, and then developing advantages essentially that are like very, very specific and are designed to generate offense through the use of, I don't want to say flooding the zone, but definitely kind of just overwhelming your opponent. That said, you want to make sure that the information is structured enough that it's easy to follow, that your judge is not going to be lost as well. Okay.
I remember that's how it felt like going against El Camino, because they would do that a lot. For like the first time I think that we went against them, they were the first ones that we knew that used like sub points.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
So it'd be like, oh, first contention, this argument, sub point
Yeah.
A, sub point B, sub point C. I was like, what?
Yeah. So
Very easy to feel lost.
El Camino, they frequently use group prep. Basically, they have a pretty large coaching staff, and so the way that they often prep for Parley is they put all their affirmative teams in one side of the room, all the negative teams on the other side of the room, and they have a coach that basically goes up to the whiteboard and starts writing arguments that they copy down, and then they have to write down those arguments and then reproduce those in a debate, right? We don't do that as much.
Isn't that only allowed in a tournament that allows for team prep?
Yeah.
Okay.
So PSCFA at this time doesn't. Neither does our tournament, neither does state or Federal Pi. So very limited cases where that actually happens these days, but sometimes it does. So yeah. But anyway, let's talk about the member of government. So you've got the you got a strong affirmative case, hopefully. Here are the things that you will want to know to be an effective second affirmative speaker. Number one, maximize the number of offensive responses, right? I already gave you an example. If your opponent is arguing the economy is going to be hurt by the plan, and that causes a recession, and that causes, widespread layoffs and poverty and blah, blah, blah. A defensive response is that the plan is not bad for the economy. An offensive response is to say, screw you, the plan is awesome for the economy. And here's 3 reasons why. That's hard to do, right? It requires brainstorming and thinking on the spot. I'll give you an example. Let's say, let's take this opioids case. The affirmative is the opioid epidemic is bad and we should, revoke this patent. Let's just ignore that it's already been revoked. Let's say the negative gets up and says, they read an economy disadvantage. If we go around revoking pharmaceutical patents, well, that's going to destroy the pharmaceutical industry, and the pharmaceutical industry is key to the American economy. It's key to tech and innovation and all these different things, and that collapses the economy, causes a recession, blah, blah, blah. As the affirmative, what could you say to turn that argument? In other words, to make the argument that no, the plan is good for the economy. Think about common sense. Also think about what was in the plan, what was in or not the plan, but the advantage that it read. How could you leverage that to show that passing the plan would be awesome for the economy?
Because it drives down prices.
You reduce the cost of medication for people who need painkillers because they're no longer paying for this ridiculously expensive prescription, and they can take cheap generics now, and that will help the economy because you're putting more money directly into consumers' pockets, which they then spend and then stimulate their local communities with.
Yeah.
Great. That's argument 1. What's another argument?
Okay. Another argument to help that. You could also say that passing the plan will cause doctors to not overcharge for the prices because it'll inflate their profits. It'll create a more stabilized practice. I'm seeing it from like an ethics standpoint. It'll make doctors not be in their fields strictly for money, which in turn causes harm to people that actually need what they're trying to buy.
I think that's pretty similar to the argument we just discussed, right? It comes back to the argument that was in that advantage about doctors no longer having a profit incentive to prescribe this, expensive brand name drug. The ethics piece, I think, is tangential to the economy piece.
Which means
Meaning ethics is not really relevant to
okay.
the economy, right? Doctors can be unethical and we can still have a great economy. Like that's just the reality of it, right? But there's one other like very obvious argument that we're missing for why the plan is awesome for the economy. Are people addicted to opioids productive economic workers?
No.
No. Are dead people productive economic workers?
No.
No.
So we're saving lives, and by saving lives, we're allowing more people to enter the workforce and all that.
We grow the economy, right?
Okay.
I mean, quite literally. You think about GDP, right? It's gross domestic product. Sure, on a per capita basis, maybe the plan doesn't move the needle, but on an overall basis, when you have more working adults, more working people, the overall size of your economy is bigger. Like, I know it's very morbid, but like any time that you have like a case where you're saving lives is typically good for the economy. You should talk about that, right? So that's a great example of using offense to answer the negatives arguments. Offense, 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 always. The second piece is, oh, and by the way, I would be remiss if I did not point out you want to avoid double turning yourself. A double turn is when you make two offensive arguments that are contradictory, and therefore they work against you. Here's an example. Your link turn. The plan is awesome for the economy, but then you also make an impact turn and you say, actually, economic growth is bad, economic decline is good. Which is a real argument that some people will make. The problem is those arguments are contradictory. You're saying at the one hand, you make the economy better, but then you're also saying a stronger economy is bad. So a smart negative team is just going to say, okay, we concede those arguments. You just double turned yourself. Congrats. So avoid a double turn. You can do that by making sure that you, when you're making offensive arguments, only make link turns or only make impact turns, but not both.
Got it.
Real simple. So next up, the member of government really has one job, and that is to answer everything. The member of government loses the debate when there's something that they don't cover. It's also important to think about like what is the order of the items you plan to answer. So let's say the negative has two different disadvantages. They have a topicality argument and they responded to your case. And they read those arguments in that order. Should you respond to them in the same order? The answer is not necessarily. I would actually advocate for you to answer it a bit differently. You would want to answer topicality first. Do you know much about topicality?
It's just staying within the topic.
Yeah, it's a theoretical argument. And the reason it's so important to answer it first is because it is kind of it is a stock issue. It's an argument that if the affirmative loses it, they lose the entire debate, regardless of what else they're winning. So it's really important to not fail to answer topicality. The best way to make sure that you avoid that scenario is to put topicality first in your speech. Generally speaking, the sequencing of arguments as you're responding to them should correlate to their importance. If an argument is absolutely critical, must answer, cannot afford to drop it, put it first. If an argument is like, you know what? Even if I didn't say a single thing in response to this, I would still have a shot at winning this debate, put it last. So my typical order would probably be something like topicality and procedural arguments first. I'm actually a big advocate of, after that, going to your own case, your own advantages, and then only after that going to the disadvantages. And I'll explain the reasoning for that in a minute, but in general, I think that that's the best sort of ordering, the best sequencing. Let's talk about what to do with your own case in the member of government, in the MG. And by this, I'm referring specifically to the Prime Minister constructive, the affirmative's first speech. The most common mistake that I see debaters make with the MG is they kind of forget that the PMC was even read. They forget it even existed, and they fail to effectively leverage it. So at a basic level, the member of government always wants to extend the contentions from the Prime Minister constructive. And this is especially the case if they're conceded. It is shocking the number of times I hear an MG get up where the leader of the opposition has conceded the entire case. They have not said a single thing against it. And the MG just pretends that never happened. They don't extend their own affirmative case. They're just hyper-focused on what the LOC said and completely neglect to bring up the PMC again, which is just unforgivable because your opponent, by conceding it, has just handed your own case to you in a silver platter and said, yes, this is wonderful, this is delicious, you can have it, I'm not even gonna try to stop you from eating it, and you just kind of leave it on the plate and just go eat the nasty stuff that they've thrown at you from the garbage bin. It's just like, why would you do that? So always, when you're the MG, talk about your own case. Your own case is the reason why you should win the debate. So if you are not talking about the reason why you should win the debate in your second speech, that debate is gonna go very poorly for you. Always extend the MG, or the PMC in the MG. The other consideration is that if you remember what we talked about with thumpers or spikes, now's the time to extend those, right? To identify them, to cross-apply them to the disadvantage flows. You can also think about specific arguments that you think are, maybe were not originally intended as thumpers or spikes, but which have usefulness in answering what your opponents argue. Right, pulling those arguments out, like, on advantage 2, a second uniqueness point, we argue this is a perfect answer to this scenario that they brought up. So that's something to consider as well. I think overall, the MG is the hardest speech in debate because you have to answer everything, right? Doing it well just requires practice, practice, practice. The Prime Minister rebuttal, figure out what you're winning. That's the end game. Figure out what is it that you are winning and how do you maximize that? Which poses the question, how do you even know what you are winning? How do you know what you're ahead on? As a debater, what do you do? What do you think about in order to determine that?
Literally what I think about to determine.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, you want me to say what I think about when I literally just think about winning?
How do you know that you are ahead on an argument?
I look at their confidence and how well they're able to keep up with my arguments while defending their own.
Okay. The confidence piece, I mean,
I'm
I-
assuming that once I actually face harder opponents, they're gonna be able to, like pretend.
confidence does not correlate to argument quality, though. It's a delivery consideration, right? More so, however, it is whether you're winning something is content based. It's content specific. So if I'm thinking about, am I ahead on an argument? Here are the factors I'm considering. Number one, what kind of concessions have been made with this argument? Like, let's say that I read an advantage and my opponent conceded that advantage. Or maybe they just read one or two weak defensive answers and that's all they've got. And meanwhile, I spent 3 minutes developing that sucker in the PMC. I know I'm ahead on that argument, right? Just on the basis of most of it being conceded. The second thing you want to figure out is who's winning the battle of truth? Who has made thus far the more persuasive case that their perspective, their position on an argument is the correct one? Because that does matter, right? You want to think about how much evidence has been presented. How high quality is that evidence? How specific is that evidence? Is one team just throwing out general claims while the other team is backed up with examples and statistics and testimony from experts, right? That kind of evidence differentiation is often what determines whether or not you're ahead on something. So don't just look at what's been conceded, but also look at, in terms of what has been argued, how high quality is it, right? So yeah, I think overall there's a number of proxies to determine if you are ahead on something, but at the end of the day, every judge is different. Every judge has different expectations, there's different ways of evaluating things, and it can be difficult to determine if you are winning something or not, but you can at least have a general sense of whether or not you're ahead on something. So you want to think about what are you ahead on and focus on those areas, but also think about what actually matters here. This is, I think, a really underrated skill. As a judge, I often find myself really frustrated by rebuttalists who spend large amounts of time on issues that fundamentally cannot or will not change the outcome of the debate. They get bogged down on some like defensive argument where I'm just like, as a judge, dude, I don't care. This argument doesn't matter. Why are we talking about this? Go talk about your advantages that you need to win, right? So you really need to think about like moving away from the mindset of just kind of spraying and praying, to use a video game metaphor, and just like, just don't throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks. Like, actually have a plan of attack. Be able to identify what are you winning in this debate, what matters in this debate, and focus on the arguments that meet both those criteria. Keep in mind, you always have a big time deficit in the affirmative rebuttal. You have way less time than the negative speaker did in the previous speaker's speeches. And so you have to be strategic about like, what am I going to focus on? Don't underestimate the importance of impact calculus. We'll talk about this in a later lecture as well. Beyond that, writing the judge's ballot. You want to tell the judge, you're going to vote for us because of X, Y, and Z. And the judge should be able to write on their ballot, I voted affirmative because of X, Y, and Z. That's what we mean by writing the ballot. Tell the judge why they're voting for you. Again, this kind of contrasts with the spray and pray method, where you throw the arguments at the wall and the judge has to figure out what sticks. Instead, tell the judge, we've won this argument. You'll vote for us in that. We've won this argument. That's another reason to vote for us. And we've won this argument. 3 makes perfection. That's really the best approach. Like, tell the judge, here's why you're voting for us. Judges will really appreciate that because it removes the messiness of debate and it makes it easier for them to sift through a decision. Okay, any other questions about affirmative strategy? Big picture stuff, small items.
I had a little bit of a question on
Sure.
you called the thumpers.
Sure.
So are they like things that you already know that the negative is going to talk about that you then have a piece of evidence for, that you have an example for? Like, is that what it is, or?
It's where you kind of predict what the negative might try to argue. Typically, they are most useful for resolutions that are very straightforward, that kind of always bring up the same kinds of arguments every single time. You don't necessarily want to spend tons of time on thumpers because they don't directly help you win. They are defensive in nature often, but they can be strategic to include.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Got it.
Any other questions?
Okay, so you said contentions, it matters how deep they are, how sophisticated they are. But what about actual plans? Because I do know that you can't just say, this is how I'm gonna do it. Like, for example, I'm gonna paint the wall green and everybody's gonna like the color green because green is the most liked color. But it's a plan, but it's not
Okay,
detailed.
that's a good question, yeah. Let's talk about plan text structure. Every plan text in a policy resolution should have 3 things. An actor. What is an actor?
An agent, like the enforcer, like what's the person behind it, basically?
Who's doing the plan? The actor, the word should, and the action. The more specific the action, the better. So conveying that through precise language. In the sample case that I read for you, the plan text was the United States federal government, that's the actor, should pass a policy to revoke the patent for OxyContin. Very, in just simple terms, describing at a high level, what are we proposing? You'll notice I didn't get into the weeds on how much that's gonna cost, who's gonna enforce it, blah, blah. You don't have to, it's just optional. You can always elaborate on that in more detail, either in cross-examination or flex time or in subsequent speeches, so long as you are not shifting from your original plan. Like, you can't go in the MG and say, oh, never mind, we're not going to revoke the patent, we're just going to straight up ban the sale of it. You can't do that. You have to have consistency with the original proposal. Cool. Any other questions? All right.